Thank you, Oliver. And also, I'd like to say thank you to all of the Korean team that has been, hosting us here for the hospitality. Everything's been amazing, so thank you very much. And now, talking a little bit more about circovirus type 2, right? And we're going to get into these 5 steps, and I also want to acknowledge that I had the opportunity to work on this material with some of our Iowa State team. So Daniel Linhares, Gustavo Silva, and also the BI team, Carmen Alonso, Luis Lexiniestic, and Oliver on this material. So it was a great opportunity to get to do a deep dive into PCV2 and how we can use the tools that we have for a great control. So for this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about PCV2, just review some of the background, and then we would get into the 5-step material for PCVD management, and then have some conclusion remarks. So PCV2, as we know, it's a very small virus, it's a very hardy virus, so it persists very, very well in the environment, and it's endemic. So pigs everywhere have it. Even vaccinated pigs, you can find it there, right? There are different genotypes. We'll be talking a little bit about those, but there's cross-protection among those different genotypes. But one thing that's important to know as well is that, especially today, since vaccines have been deployed to the market, one of the main issues that we have is subclinical infection. So we got to be aware of that, because most of the economic burden related to PCV2 may be coming from subclinical infections. So PCV2, we have many different genotypes. We started there. The first one detected was PCV2A, and then PCV2B kind of emerged, and then PCV2D today is actually the one that's more dominant globally. But it kind of followed that direction. So again, many, many different genotypes. But one thing that's important to know is that in terms of serotypes, they're all the same serotype. And that's why that's going to be important when we talk about protection. So one question that I have for you here, is this going to be on the Slido as well, or can they access that there? Yes. So if you guys can answer that question, what do you think is the PCV2 genotypes that the Circoflex vaccine offers cross-protection to? So you have some options in there. Let me know what you think. Six, 7. Many, many different genotypes. There will probably be more in the future. That's my guess. It's a virus that mutates a lot. For a DNA virus, it's a virus that mutates a lot. So, but again, importantly, all the same serotype. This way? Sorry about that. Should we move forward? Yeah, okay. So, we're going to come back into that. I'm not sure, should we see results of that already? There we go. So 64% of you guys thinking about all protects against all genotypes. And we're going to get to that here in a little bit. So let's move forward in terms of, let's go back over here. Just some of the highlights in terms of the PCV2 transmission. When you think about transmission, primary route of transmission would be oral nasal contact with infected different biological materials of pigs, so feces, urine, direct contact with pigs. Like I said, PCV2 is very stable in the environment, so it will be there and the pigs can get exposed that way. Vertical transmission can also play a large role, especially for those herds where they don't have strong sow immunity, and we'll comment a little bit more about that in a little bit. When we think about the dynamics of shedding of the virus, vaccinated animals, they will not have, just vaccinating the animals does not mean that they're going to be negative, right? So you find virus in vaccinated animals. What's going to happen typically, it's a dramatic reduction on the viral load that you're going to find in those vaccinated animals. And that's the thing that's going to be key, right, for protection, that you have that dramatic reduction in the viral presence in those animals is going to allow those animals to fight it back. And one of the things that has been gaining traction is this concept of PCV2 stability, which is still being discussed, but it would be how the virus is behaving into these populations that would allow the disease to express itself, especially when we talk about what's going on into the sow herds. We talked a little bit about this before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here, but be sure that when you're thinking about diagnostics for PCV2, that you have a complete assessment to really try to understand if PCV2 is playing a role in what you're seeing in the field conditions. Talking about this cross-protection that we just mentioned here, there are many, many different studies that have been done with the Circoflex vaccine across many of those different genotypes that are present in the field, right? So you can see here all of those different studies. Those are all available, and we can get those to you if you'd be interested in dive deeper in those studies. But you can see over there against PCV2A, PCV2B, co-challenges with PCV2A and B, PCV2D. In this other slide here, the list goes on and on what the vaccination with Circoflex and challenges with different genotypes of circovirus, what the benefits would be from prevention of or reduction of mortality, reduction of clinical signs, improvement of feed conversion, and weight gain. So the key answer here is yes, there is only one serotype, even though we have many different genotypes of PCV2. In the vaccine, Circoflex will provide protection against all of those different genotypes. One thing that's important in here, this study, what they were doing is that they were evaluating the clinical performance of these animals that actually had clinical signs of PCV2 systemic disease against animals that were not showing any clinical signs and that were not vaccinated. So those animals that were showing clinical signs, they had the 26% reduction in average daily gain. But those animals that were not showing clinical signs but were infected with PCV2, they also had a 16% reduction in the average daily gain. Same thing with the feed conversion rate. So sometimes those animals are not expressing disease in the ways that we know, but it's still important to make sure that we are giving those animals the best chance that they can have and fight that decrease in performance by vaccinating those, right? So those are all animals that were not vaccinated, but were not showing clinical signs. So it's important, again, to make sure that we give the best condition to those animals when we are thinking about what to do. Here I have another question for you guys. When we think about PCV2 disease, what's most common to find in terms of like co-infections? Do we find it more often alone, in association with PRRS, in association with Mycoplasma pneumonia, influenza, or Streptococcus suis? And I'll go a little faster on this one, so fire away. If you guys can put it on the results screen already, we can keep talking about it. So most of you think that the most common find would be Persian PCV2, and we'll see that the results of that in a little bit. Alone, 0% over here. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. How is PCV2 being detected in the lab, right? But just for you to have an idea here, about what PCV2 does. That was the overview, and we wanted, and you are aware of that, right? So that was just like a refresher. What I really wanted to do is to get a little bit of a deep dive into this 5-step. You already know that for PRRS, we knew that worked for PRRS, and we wanted to apply the same concept for circovirus because the concept works for circovirus as well. How does it work for circovirus? So we're going to go through these steps. So steps for the control of circovirus, they would go mainly associating these 3 different actions here, right? So you got to evaluate the clinical signs, especially with production data. You're also going to take in consideration the strategic diagnosis and diagnostics that you're going to apply so you can take action to better control circovirus. So that's what it's going to be covered in these 5 different steps for PCV2 management. So in steps 1 to 3, what we're going to do is especially clarify, diagnose, and understand what's going on in terms of the virus. Is it truly a concern or not? So in step 1, we're going to set our goals. Which PCVD are we going to investigate? Are we trying to do a benchmark across farms within our system? Or are there specific targets that we're trying to improve? In step 2, we are going to determine the status, and we may use PCR data, necropsy, and histopath, as we viewed before. That would be important to really understand if PCV2 is contributing to disease. And we can also use different tools to track PCV2 DNA load. But the goal is always to confirm if disease caused by PCV2 is present in the herd. In step 3, the idea is to understand if PCV3 or PCV2 is acting alone, or if there are other things that could be contributing to the clinical picture that we are observing in the herd. So co-infections, environmental stressors, and the vaccine program consistency. Those are all things that would be evaluated in that step. And then the final steps would be to actually plan and then execute, and then make sure that follow up to make sure that everything is working the way it should be working. So you develop and implement those different solutions, and you monitor the outcomes by tracking key performance indicators, and also the circulation by PCR. And we are going to talk a little bit about how you can do that over the next few slides. Maybe I'll skip this one so we have time to discuss everything else. But we are going to be talking about sow vaccination as well, what we would be referring as like a whole herd approach for PCV2 control. So this is what this is going to be about. So step 1, you're going to identify your desired goals. So here, what's important in this step, it's actually to observe and compare the performance, right? So you want to know if the particular herd that you have in mind, or the different sow farms or flows that you have in your system, how are they behaving? Is it necessary that I do or launch an investigation to try to understand if there are any issues that could be contributing to clinical signs that I'm seeing in those herds? So what you want to do is to try to understand specific questions that you might have regarding reproduction, growth, or overall health. And the way you're going to do that is to review and analyze your farm historical data. So you're going to investigate over time key performance indicators that could be affected by one of the PCVDs that are that we know that the PCV2 cause, right? So reproductive disease, systemic disease, or PDNS. So you're all going to be documenting different metrics that could be affected by those different diseases. So for example, one of the things that you can do is to evaluate abortions over time. You set up your baseline, and you do that with a number of weeks, so about 20, 23 weeks, that you want to make sure that your herd is having consistent performance. And then once that baseline is established, you can look for the deviations that would tell you that something's wrong with that herd. You can do that for different parameters. In the growth finishing side, you can look for deviations or how consistent the performance of your animals are for different metrics that include weight at the packing plant or feed conversion for different groups, or average daily gain, right? So what you want is a very consistent performance that's shown here by a narrow standard deviation compared to a group like this, where you have like a large spread that could be just a lot of variation between those animals, and then that may trigger you to go to step 2, right? So in this step 1, what you want to do, again, try to set the things that you want to investigate, that you want to look at, that you heard, to see if there's any reason to go forward to start an investigation. So if everything is good, if there is no issues that you're seeing in all of those metrics that you're following, life's good. You don't have to go forward, right? You can stop at step 1 and go evaluate different farms, but for that specific farm, if there isn't like a reason that you should be worried about the performance of that flow, stop there. Now, if there is an issue that you're observing and things are deviating from what you expect that would be normal, or your herd is not performing as well as other herds in the system, then you may, in conjunction with that initial data, define some targets to do these investigations. And that's when we get into step 2. So step 2 is all about determining the current status for the PCV2 in the herd that you're investigating. So you want to differentiate between screening and diagnosing, like we've talked about before. You just don't want to rely on PCR alone or ELISA alone. You want to confirm that your herd is having or you want to document that PCV2 disease is actually present. So on the screening, you're going to briefly assess the PCV2 circulation in the population, right? So you can use PCR for that. But again, because PCV2 is endemic pathogen, it's going to be very common to detect it. And just because you detect it, it doesn't mean that the animals are sick because of PCV2, right? So you gotta launch an investigation to make sure that you're going to diagnose PCV2 disease. And we talked about this before. You're going to submit tissues to the lab, both fresh and fixed, and you're going to associate your different tests like PCR, histopathology, and then immunohistochemistry or in situ hybridization to determine that those animals are sick with PCV2. Here are some of the different ways you can use screening methods with PCR or ELISA, and some of the ways you can sample types and number of samples that you can use. But those, again, would be just a way that you would be monitoring that population over time, and would be a reason for you to trigger a more in-depth investigation in case any abnormality is detected. So to make a diagnosis, we've talked about this before, you got associated the clinical signs of one of the PCVDs that's out there. You got to confirm that with microscopic lesions. And then the last step, confirm that with your in situ hybridization or immunohistochemistry. And that's an agreement that different universities, professors, researchers in PCV2, and the veterinarians in the field have agreed that this is the way that you gotta go about making sure that PCV2 is a problem in your herd. The step 3, if you confirm that PCV2 is present in there, what you wanna know is is it acting alone? Or is it a primary or a secondary issue? Like, are there things that are expressing themselves in the herd that are allowing PCV2 to become a problem, right? So what you want to do is characterize the virulence and the infectivity of different pathogens that might be present. You want to make sure that you understand if there are any things in the environment of those pigs that may be contributing or making them more susceptible to some of these pathogens that are allowing them to be expressed. And you also have to understand some of these host characteristics. So what's the age that things are happening? Are there some prior exposures? Co-infections, so all of those things are important. So going back to the thing we were talking about, you guys were right. PCV2 and PRRS are the most common co-infection that we observe in the lab. PCV2 alone, there's actually, I don't think that's showing very well over here, but there is a little bar over there. You can find PCV2 alone, but it's very rare. So most commonly, you're going to find it in association with PRRS or PRRS and mycoplasma, and very often with different bacterial pathogens as well. Streptococcus suis would be the most common that we would be finding it. There's a jukebox topic that we can talk about this, like get a little bit more of a deeper dive in the co-infections that we see with PRRS and PCV2 and how that impact the health of the animals. So again, we got to understand beyond what PCV2 is doing, right? Is it primary, like I said? Is that what's triggering the animals to get sick and allowing a cascade of events that's going to lead to the poor performance that you might be seeing in the farm? Or is it something else that's allowing PCV2 to flourish in the farm and cause issues that you're detecting by your diagnostic investigation? So that would be very, very important to do. One of the things that we want to make sure is that we understand if the vaccine integrity is being maintained through all of the cold chain, for example, or if there are issues with compliance of vaccination. So a lot of the times for these cases that we receive at the VDL, we say, hey, we diagnosed PCV2 disease here in this tissues that you sent to the lab, and then we call the vet and try to understand, and they say, yeah, this, the people in the farm forgot to vaccinate those pigs, or the vaccines were sitting in the room before these pigs were vaccinated. So all of that is actually very common when we find like consistent issues with PCV2. So vaccination compliance and maintenance of the integrity of the vaccine are very important steps that need to be focused when we are doing these investigations related to PCV2 disease manifestation. When we think about PCV or step 4, so you identified your goals, you understood the role for PCV2 in your herd, and then you identified what can possibly be contributing for PCV2 to be expressed in the farm. So you have all of that information. Now it's time to start planning and then taking action to control PCV2. So in this step 4, we are going to develop and implement those solutions, and then we have a few scenarios that can play out over here. In an outbreak situation where you have over disease and clinical manifestation, the objective here is to do a stabilization as quickly as possible and reduce the clinical signs of the animals. So in this scenario, you can do a whole herd vaccination with two doses, 4 to 5 weeks apart in the breeding herd. And then you can, most of the herds that we know today, they do vaccination for the piglets already, but you can make sure that that's being properly done and addressed. All of those vaccine-related issues that we talked about should be investigated, compliance, vaccine integrity. And then the other things that should be considered is, one, how are the guilds being managed in terms of PCV2, but also other diseases, right? But then when we think about PCV2, it's very important that we prepare that guild to have a good immunity for her to grow well, have good performance, and also transmit that to her litters in the future. And when we think about in terms of the breeding herd, again, you can do that through mass vaccinations throughout the year, or you can have scheduled vaccinations, for example, pre-breeding or during gestation at some point. And we're going to discuss a little bit about that as well. So if you have a PCV2 outbreak, this scenario here was an issue with mummification. So you can see that that was the number of or the percentage of mummified piglets was skyrocketing, and the intervention here was vaccination of the sows, double vaccination of the sows, and when you measure that over time, that intervention was very targeted, but it worked for the problem that we had in this herd, right? So you apply that intervention and you keep monitoring those metrics of interest to see if the results that you're expecting are occurring. So again, for breeding herd and guild vaccination, these are ways that you would do this over time with the objective of maintaining high herd immunity and decrease virus circulation and increase passive immunity for the piglets, right? Both of those populations are important to be managed and tracked to see if your herd is going to, or to actually make sure that your herd is going to be the best performance possible. In terms of the timing of the sow vaccination, what this study did, they went there and they did like a pre-mating vaccine, a mid-gestation vaccine, in the late gestation vaccination or no vaccination. And what you can see here is that differences in performance. So all of those herds, regardless of when they were vaccinated, for mummified piglets, they had a better performance compared to sows that were not vaccinated. And that was also impacted a little bit in terms of the cross-fostering that those piglets were receiving, and also the birth weight of those piglets. So those sows that received vaccination at mid-gestation and late gestation, the birth weight of those piglets were improved compared to those of the sows that were not vaccinated. For the piglets, the objective here is to protect piglets of field exposure and also to control any of the PCVDs that would be present in nursery and grow finish. So breeding herd, it's all about to control the health of that sow farm, but also providing protect for those piglets early in life. Not allowing disease to manifest early in life for those piglets. Piglet vaccination, we're looking for protection of those piglets throughout the rest of their lives. And here we have this study just showing like a comparison of different vaccines. So we have the flex combo here in green against a different vaccine and piglets that were not vaccinated. And what we're seeing here is the average daily gain of those populations, right? So very different here from those non-vaccinated pigs, poor performance in this case. But here's also, you can see that there was a difference, small difference, but an important difference for the different vaccines in there, because this difference compounds over time. So what you're seeing here is a difference in economic value of those pigs based on that average weight at the end of their life, so at the packing plant, the standard deviation, and the economic impact that you have between those pigs that were received the Circoflex compared to the other vaccine and those pigs that were not vaccinated. So again, even those small impacts matter over time. And again, don't focus only on the vaccine, right? It's important to evaluate everything that we talked about here the environment, and all the factors that could be affecting the pigs and the sows, to have a comprehensive plan to make sure that those pigs are going to have the best performance possible, right? So we can't rely only on the vaccine. We also gotta give those pigs the best conditions possible so they can express the best of their genetic potential. Make sure that you control co-infections, but also provide a good environment for those pigs. And then finally, you monitor the outcomes. So you track the outcomes that you think that you're concerned at the beginning. Those could be abortions or mummified piglets, stillborns, and then for your pigs post-weaning, you may track mortality, average daily gain, the coefficient variation of performance of different metrics for those pigs post-weaning. That would be important for you. And you want to make sure that those are on track. If they are not, if by any chance they go off tracks, you go back to the processes and restart in step 1 to evaluate all of the possible constraints that could be leading to that poor performance. All of this is explained in detail in the manual that you have on your tables there, and I'd be glad to talk to you if you have any questions regarding that. So just to finalize, the take-home message here, it would be PCV2 is one of the most common pathogens in the environment. Due to the efficacy of the vaccines, the epidemiology has changed, and strong herd immunity is crucial for PCV2 control. So gilts must be prepared for mating. Sows also need to have robust immunity, and pigs must be prepared for the field exposure. In terms of the diagnostics, it's important to combine the different tools that we have to make sure that we are understanding PCV2 the way, if it's really causing an issue, and also make sure that we control all of the issues that could be contributing for PCV2 to express itself. And the 5-step in here would provide a holistic approach for PCV2 manage, providing a robust immunity for the control of PCV2-associated diseases. With that, thank you again, and be ready for questions at the end.